What would you say to Maya, what you've heard from Maya?
I entirely disagree. I think you would be hard-pushed to find a single country in the world that has been as tolerant and as welcoming of migration as this one. In fact, I cannot think of one anywhere in the world. I've travelled widely, not just on our continent, but across the world, and I can assure you that if the numbers that came into this country over the post-war period up to now had gone into any other country in the world, we would be seeing a very different response. And I think this is a knee-jerk assault on the British people, which is continuing and should stop. We were talking earlier about some of the economic implications. The economic implications of globalization include the possibility that people born in this country, at the same time as somebody in this country has a child, they are competing with dozens of other children around the world to get to the lifestyle benefits that people across the world would dream of and which people in this country think is their birthright. And that's changing. And that's going to change across all sorts of parts of the developed world. And one of the things that makes that change far, far more painful is the idea that it will happen simultaneously with an assault on their identity. Because people can potentially take the stagnation of wages, they can potentially take the living standards questions, but if at the same time you say, oh, and by the way, maybe we don't always say you're racist, but we sort of imply it, then I think you're going to build up a lot of problems for the future. And by the way, very quickly on your 1970s point, one of the things about migration is it takes a long time for that effect to happen. If you look at the opinion polls on migration in this country that followed the influx after the Blair government, it took time for people's attitudes to, as it were, harden on migration, precisely because the impact of that migration takes the time to happen. So as well as it were, you know, misrepresenting the facts, I think you just have to be extremely careful not to say, you know, this country, which is, as I say, the most tolerant country in the world, is in fact the most bigoted, because if you travel anywhere around the world, you will see a very different picture.
I would just like, I think Douglas makes a very important point there. This point about tolerance is part, as far as I'm concerned, part of the problem. For decades, people have been told to put up with people, and there's never been a concerted explanation to demystify difference. So people have been told, you know, put up with that person living down the street. They're different from you, they've come from a different country, maybe they cook a different cuisine. Put up with them.
What if they have? Can I ask you something? Because this comes to the heart of what so many people are debating at the moment, and it's actually at the heart of Douglas's book, and we'll get his response to it in a moment. What if they have a fundamentally different set of values, social values? Because we've come through, well, it's the 500th anniversary of the Reformation this year. We've had that, we've had the Enlightenment, we've had the Age of Reason. It's been a long road to where we are today for our, broadly speaking, you know, liberal values. What if people are inimical to those?
So firstly, we need to look at the fact that the history of Britain is one of my people coming in and out of the country. So this idea that values exist in this kind of hermetically sealed unit of the nation state quite clearly isn't true. If you look at David Olusoga's Black Britain, you'll see that over 2,000 years, people have been coming in and out of this country, contributing ideas and to social change. And what I would like to be answered on this question of social values, what are the social values? What are the social values that we feel are at risk by migration? Let's pinpoint them particularly because this is consistently talked about from the right, and it's never quite clear.
I can do. Firstly, on your point about the constant movement, actually, the movement into these islands in particular has been really minimal over I mean, what was the biggest event over the last millennia? The Norman Conquest. About a 5% population shift as a cause of the Norman Conquest. So this idea that, as it were, the movement has been perennial. Also, the movement that you're talking about most of the time is movement from France with the Huguenots, for instance, Protestant French people, or movement from Ireland into what we now call mainland Britain. That is not the same as somebody from Eritrea or Ghana or Myanmar moving in to live in Salford. It's a totally different movement, and you should admit that.
What's so different about people from Eritrea, Myanmar and Ghana?
My God, you can't have gone anywhere. Specifically. You can't have gone anywhere. If you honestly have to ask that question. It is a simple statement of the obvious. It is a simple statement of the obvious that countries and cultures have differences.
What
it doesn't mean
specifically what are the cultural specificities?
Okay, I'll give you the history lesson. This country has, throughout most of its history, been for instance, a Christian country. It has been, I'm not a practicing Christian myself, but it has been historically a Christian country. It's been particularly a Protestant Christian country.
I mean,
with views, if I may just finish, you see, you ask me to define something and then I try and then you talk. You have institutions that, for instance, epitomise the country. In this country, the institutions that epitomised our country were an established monarchy, for instance, the establishment of Parliament, the establishment of the judiciary and of the law courts, the establishment of the great educational institutions, a whole set, I could go on and on. Now, see, one of the problems is, whenever people say, well, what is this thing that you call Britain? We have an identity. It's forever being put on the psychiatrist's couch now and being deconstructed. But we have an identity just as other people have an identity. We don't have to war or hate each other, but we should recognise it exists.
OK, Myra, we'll come back to you. Just hold fire just a second. Let's all... OK, Guy.
I just want to put in a stylised fact. We actually in this country do not have a very high percentage of migrants. It's actually slightly less than the European average. I happen to be a migrant who lives in Europe and works in Europe. And I don't share your values, I don't share your identity. I share many of the identities and values of people with whom I live in Europe. And I think this is complete nonsense, if I may say so, because I think we're no more tolerant or less tolerant. Some people are tolerant in this country. We've absorbed many groups over the years, but so have many other countries, and it's great. It's great.
Well, no, it isn't great.
So the gentleman who just spoke there, I don't agree with him at all. Now, that may be his anecdotal evidence that he doesn't see much of a difference, but I just don't see that happening. I mean, if he's basically out there, okay, with white Europeans mainly inside there and a few smattering of migrants or other people from other nations, maybe he doesn't see it as much. But the changing is there. And there has to be something that you call British. There's something that has to be there that you would call American. If somebody comes here to the United States of America, you know what? There's a certain ideals and beliefs that we have. We should believe fundamentally that America comes first. That's first and foremost. America comes first. You believe in the founding documents, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, property rights, habeas corpus, the rule of law, the separation of church and state, the founding fathers, the flag, those kind of things. People want to talk about, so those are the things that you can coalesce around, nation, nationality. Now, of course, for example, nobody other than, you can't, like I can't become Chinese. I can't become Japanese. I could go to China. I could go to Japan. Depending upon their rules and regulation and laws, stay there long enough, I could get a Chinese passport. I could say I'm a citizen of China or a citizen of Japan, but I would never be Chinese or Japanese. But a Chinese person, a Japanese person can certainly come to America, can certainly go to England, get their passport, and now guess what? They're called British. If they're proud, they're going to say, I'm British, I'm American. And then after that, I don't like to use hyphenations. I don't like to say Italian American, Chinese American, Japanese American, Indian American. I don't use that nomenclature at all. I like to say you're an American first. And then if you want to hyphenate yourself, ethnicities, and you got 3 or 4, you could be Portuguese, Italian, Spanish, and Indian. Okay, pick one, but you're first American. And then go down the line with the hyphenations. That way we're all one people. Now, you can have differences among people, just like a family, and that's fine. But on the core values of the institution, what is it? For example, you have people coming from Africa that have a completely set of different values, different culture. Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Middle East, Israel, India, Pakistan, Burma, Saudi Arabia. I'm just saying, suppose, for example, somebody comes from Saudi Arabia, comes to Britain and decides to tell everybody that, and starts telling everybody in the community, everywhere else, women aren't supposed to drive, and starts to push that. You're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? What type of values are you bringing? We don't want those Saudi Arabian values if you're saying that women can't drive. I don't care if you think it's a religious thing and then that's not supposed to be done either, because it's supposed to be separation of church and state. These are the things that people are talking about. When Douglas was talking about the identity of being British in the monarchy, the parliament, the structure of rule and law, the language, the laws, the government institutions, the scholastic institutions, colleges, universities, all of this sprung up. The liberal arts, all of this. The writings, it's all part of what we want to call Judeo-Christian philosophy, at least here in the United States of America. This is what makes a nation, the values that it puts together. And as you get more and more, if you get that immigration that puts in with no integration, it starts to water that down because the people that are coming in don't embrace it because they just haven't had enough time because there's further immigration coming in. People behind, people behind, people behind. Anyways, folks, that's what we have in store for you today. Douglas Murray, along with others here, asking about the question, globalization, how does that affect the nation and its values? You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective, what happens when you get all these things colliding together. Let's get back to the interview right now.
We now have a populist reaction against it.
It isn't great, you said.
No, it isn't. But you're also wrong that we're close to the top in terms of numbers over the last 20 years or so.
No,
we
we're
are.
not. 13%.
No, it's more than that now.
It's not.
But anyway, we have had a very big change. The immigrant and minority population in Britain was about 4 million in the mid-90s. It is now closer to 11 million. I mean, and in many places this has led to a great change. But at the same time, and people in all places at all times are hostile to large-scale immigration. We just have to be realistic. You know, people prefer similarity and familiarity and stability in their lives. I mean, that's just a fact of life. But at the same time that the numbers have been going up and the anxiety and the wariness about it has been going up, racial hostility, racist attitudes have been going down. I've just written a book about the value divides in British society. You look at the British social attitude surveys on all the great things.
That's what I was hinting at earlier on. Our social attitudes have changed enormously in the last 40 years.
A massive liberalisation, a great liberalisation has gone on over sexuality, over gender, and over race too. And I think that there's something else we have to remember. I mean, we have an absolutely in-your-face globalisation. Now, it's one thing if your factory closes and moves to China or Myanmar, is one thing. But when that happens, and then a whole different population from you is imported in your country to compete with you in your own place, that is a very, very big difference.
Let me pick you up on something, if I may. Let me pick you up on something, if I may. I just want to wind it back to something you said there about the fact that we've had a huge liberalisation process in this country. Would you say we had in Europe, we have the gold standard of human rights in the world? Would you say we are the leaders? Well,
we started first. I mean, our anti-discrimination rules, which we drew partly from America in the mid-60s, they set the tone for much of what was happening.
So, so Maya, how do we lead the rest of the world and bring them to our gold standard, our more, provocative here, our more advanced human rights?
Well, quite frankly, I don't agree with this idea that we're bringing the rest of the world where we're leading. If you look at the history
Are
of the
we leading?
No, if you look at the history of the British Empire, what you'll see is actually a very bloody history.
Now.
But now, I mean, I think that it's...
In terms of LGBT, in terms of women...
I think that racial attitudes, actually, if you look at the British Social Attitudes Survey, there is increasing people who say that they are intolerant and do not like people of different races. So that is actually increasing. So I think there's a problem.
There's been an upward blip in a long downward trend. An upward blip because the change has been so radical and rapid.
Well, we can't ignore that. And to come back to Douglas's point originally, which I think we need to probe more, is this idea that...
Probe away.
Is that this idea that British society, he listed the monarchy, he listed Parliament, that is somehow under threat from people from Eritrea, Ghana and Myanmar. That's not clear to me how that's the case. You've listed all these institutions, but you haven't really explained exactly what it is that is under threat from these people.
A quick answer from Douglas, because he has to answer that, because he's had a direct... He's had a direct challenge there, and then Sam, I'm going to come to you, and Linda, I'm going to go Linda first, then Sam, but Douglas, answer that direct challenge from Maya.
You can do it on all sorts of things. You can do it on historical attitudes, or you can do it on, for instance, current social attitudes, which is, I'll throw out as one example. And take an example that Nikki just cited of tolerance. I think we agree in Britain that we're a tolerant country, we're meant to be a tolerant country, we try to be a tolerant country, and so on. There's been polling in recent years that actually shows that the more immigration you have, the less tolerance you have on certain issues, not because we, the British people, have become intolerant, but because people come with views of their own. Let me give you a very quick example. A poll carried out 2 years ago by YouGov asked people their opinions on homosexuality, morally acceptable or morally not acceptable. Across the country as a whole, about 14% of the British people said homosexuality not morally acceptable. In London, it was double that. Why would that be? Is it because London, the capital city, is just a particular home of homophobia? Or might it be, as I would suggest it is, because people come into the country with attitudes of their own? And you may deprecate that, and I deprecate that, but we should at least acknowledge it, and you're trying to cover it over.
No, I think that actually, this poll, what's actually, there's another poll that shows actually, and asks about attitudes towards homosexuality and same-sex marriage, and you actually find, apart from Scotland, in one of the questions, London has better attitudes towards homosexuality than the rest of the other regions in the country.
They could be evangelical Christian, there could be certain Muslim communities. You know that attitudes are harder on that.
But the point.
This girl doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. If you did that within the African community that comes over, okay, from sub-Saharan Africa, they are very opposed to homosexuality and homosexual liaisons and gay marriage and whatever. All right? Both from a cultural viewpoint and both from a religious standpoint. The same thing is going to happen from people coming from the Mideast, people coming from India, people coming from Pakistan, Muslims coming from out there, some of the Eastern Orthodox, Christian religions, coming, from Poland and the Slavic countries, also have that. They bring a whole bunch of other things too with them too. The treatment of women. In terms of, male superiority, they're thinking male dominance in society, those very misogynistic ideas of men over women coming from these areas. So this girl, nobody wants to talk about it. And I don't know why Douglas should have just gone right there for the jugular and talked. He did with the homosexuality thing, but where about the things with the equality of women's rights? And people coming from all sorts of other areas in terms of all kinds of things. What about the people coming that don't want to be, gambling, don't want drinking, the other vices, all kinds of things? It's just, there are issue after issue after issue. We're not talking about foods. People coming with different foods. Oh, I don't like Chinese. Okay, well, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to eat sushi because I don't like it. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about people's values and the things that they culturally were inculcated in them since birth. And then when they come over to a new country, they start to inculcate those same values and cultures, into their children. And depending upon the integration that they have within society, if they keep to their own kind, the majority of the time, their kids are basically raised the same way. They don't have any outside influence. They don't go into a major university. They stick around in the same, locale. Don't go on to higher education. That's just going to perpetuate on and on and on.
My point is that Douglas is citing this poll, but there's counter evidence to that. And I just want to make a broader point that, yes, there are some attitudes that I don't agree with, such as homophobia. Yeah. I think that we should be challenging those, because if you go back to the late 1980s, even Margaret Thatcher was saying that our traditional children were being taught traditional moral values, were also being taught that they had an inalienable right to be gay. Sure. And that led to the Section 28. So the point is, social attitudes do change, and you should be encouraging other people to change.
Wait a minute, okay. People will make up.
Very interesting discussion there between Douglas and the other people in the audience. We're going to get some other clips and go for some more in terms of what Douglas Murray's there. But in the meantime, folks, we appreciate taking the time to watch this video here. You're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, and if you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. If you found it was of value to you and entertaining, comment down in the section below. If there's any other people that you'd like us to sort of find out on the internet, seek them out and give our reactions and analysis on that, tell us in the comments. Like, share, and follow us. Y'all know what to do. Take a look at our other video links above and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.